the designer comes in with an idea. He says, I want this perfume bottle. It's sort of triangular, but it sort of twists, sort of pyramid shape maybe, but it twists. And you just have to make it. You sit down, you're doing a lot of drawing, you're doing a lot of measuring, and you do as much as you can on the machines. And then where you can't make a cut with a machine, you start to just, make scribe lines and sand to the scribe line.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. So glad to have you here today, and visit contrabassconversations.com for all the details. And I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Let me know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you play. I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. Now, today is the third and final episode of live coverage of Bass 2016 in Prague. This conversation is with Rob Anzellotti and Chris Mathers. The three of us sat down in their Airbnb in Prague. We're looking over one of the main streets. It's bustling. You can hear the noise in the background. And we're just chatting about life as an expat, which both of them are. And I'd been talking with Rob about doing an interview anyway, and we realized that we were all going to be in Prague at the same time, so why not just sit down and do it live, which we did. So we get deep into extensions. It's the first time I've ever really talked about extensions on the podcast here, and what Rob does is he makes these bass capos, basscapos.com. You can learn about them, and we talk about how Rob got into designing in the first place, and all about extensions and measurements and pounds per square inch and all sorts of stuff like that. It's a super deep dive into extensions. And it's one of those conversations I love. It's very off the cuff, informal. All three of us are chatting and laughing and having a good time. And I hope you have a good time with us as well. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Daddario Strings, and you can hear me playing my set of Daddario strings in the background here. I'm really liking these strings. They're great for arco, they're great for pizzicato, they've got a nice growl, they're good hybrid strings. I do a lot of both styles of playing and I love them. Daddario just set up a string giveaway for Contrabass Conversations listeners. And I'll have a link in the show notes for this, but you can go to contrabassconversations.com/strings. If you're in the car or you're on the treadmill or you're doing dishes or whatever, contrabassconversations.com/strings. Fill out some information. You'll be enrolled in a string giveaway, which is very cool. One of the many things that I've been talking about with them as we move forward. All right, here we go with our conversation featuring Rob Anzellotti and Chris Mathers.
Boom, we're on.
Okay.
I'm going to go back and review everything.
Yeah, exactly. You want to just introduce yourselves,
Yeah,
if you
sure.
don't mind.
So my name's Rob Anzellotti. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. Went to Cleveland Institute for a few years for my bachelor's, and went to New York. And I now make bass capos, C extension capos for your C extension.
Nice. Or gates. Or
Gates, or
levers.
Levers, stops.
A lot of names. Stops.
Several names. With me is Chris Mathers.
I grew up outside Philadelphia, was a trumpet major. Then I went to college at a small college out there, Westchester State College, and quickly became a double major in voice and trumpet for some reason.
Where's the bass?
Yeah. That was a bass, yeah. Still am, as a matter of fact. It gets lower every year. But then the last year, after I had done all the other band instruments and string instruments and percussion, I picked up the bass, and that was that. So then I did 7 years of public school teaching, and then 4 years of that was in Germany. Got some money, came back and did my master's with Orrin O'Brien in New York. And now I build websites.
Yeah, which is and both of you guys have had interesting paths. That's really when did you start thinking? This is I'm asking Rob now. Right. When did you start thinking about doing this the bass capo?
I remember the day.
Oh, yeah, really?
Yeah, because I knew about extensions, I suppose. I went to Ohio State for a year, and my roommate was a bass player and had an extension. I didn't really think about it at the time. And then the whole time I was at Cleveland Institute, nobody had one. I think the one guy in the orchestra at the time had one.
Yeah. Extensions with the fingered.
I think his was fingered. I don't even remember if anyone was playing with the machine in Cleveland Orchestra at that time. But then when I got to New York, I started thinking it would be cool to be able to play lower than the E. Mm-hmm. And Homer Mensch, I was studying with him. And in a lesson, he says, "Oh, look at what I have. I just got my Galliano back from David Gage, and look what he did for me." And he had a B extension with gates, with chromatic gates. And I looked at that and I said, "Wow, that would be really cool to have." But I just thought, but that looks really expensive, maybe a little clunky. Mm-hmm. And I said, somebody's got to make something that's universal. You can just buy off the shelf and put on yourself, or have any luthier be able to do it. And also, it was not adjustable. Mm-hmm. Most of the traditional, approaches toward gates is they're not really very adjustable. And so it just was in my brain for years. And then maybe 3 years later, I found myself in an apartment where I'd set up in a closet, had a little disc sander, a little, micro bandsaw, a few little tools just, as a hobby. I think I was tearing apart some student basses and learning to repair them. And I started working on that. And I had been playing in a band with a blues band with a guy who was a jeweler. And he said, well, let's work on this together. And we came up with a little prototype. And it worked. And so I started, I had an extension already from a guy named Gino Biondo.
Okay.
You ever heard of him?
That name rings a bell.
Yeah. A lot of Manhattan School students
I have
in those days. He has an
extension
very nice
on my
one.
1860 French bass that...
Really?
Yeah, it looks very good. Yeah. It's got...
Actually, both of your extensions are Gino Biondo extensions.
Oh, really? Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I bought my bass from Rob.
His second bass is
Rob
from me.
has, that bass I bought from Rob has the original prototype capo.
Well, not the first prototype, but
we
pretty close to it.
But yeah. I am the major spokesman for this thing because I have been playing on this thing for 20 years without adjustment, with, reliability, playing 4 or 5, 10 times a year, concerts where, I can rely on that thing doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it looks good. It's organic to the instrument. It's got the curves, it's got smoothness, it's got the polished brass that looks like the polished brass machines. I'm an advocate because I think primarily it does what it's supposed to do. It's easy to use and it really looks good. It looks like it fits.
Yeah.
So I said, Rob, when you move to Germany, you can't quit this.
That's the thing. Well, let's back up a little bit. So I had it on my bass. I went through, a couple different prototypes, getting it better and better. And at some point, I said, other bass players now, when I go to rehearsals, other guys are going to see that and have to have it. But Chris was the only one for a long, long time that even said, oh, let me try that at least, on a break. And so in the meantime, I'd sort of given up on it as an idea of something I could market. But in the meantime, I got a job making prototypes for cosmetics containers.
Oh, interesting.
And it was just because a roommate in the house where I lived met a guy at a party. He was like a male model and, that kind of thing. And so he was at a Revlon party. He met a guy and he says, Rob, I was talking to this guy. You know what he does? He makes like the packaging prototypes for all the containers. And he says, I'm looking for a guy that's just good with his hands. Knows how, it doesn't have to be trained in design, but just likes to make things. And he says, I know the guy that you need. And so he sends me over there. My roommate said that. Yeah, right. And I went over there.
Talking about me.
Right. And I just brought him some, done some metal bow tips and a few little things in metal and some of the jewelry stuff that I was working on with my friend Robin. And I didn't think anything would come of it, but 3 months later he calls me and says, you want to come in like 2 days a week? And I said, sure, I'd love to come in 2 days a week. And then about 9 months later, he gave me his job.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And then, so I was making prototypes for Revlon. And I worked
like the cool looking like perfume bottles and stuff like that, right?
We started out.
So how do you make those? Like, how does that work?
You work a lot in acrylic and metal, things that are going to be shiny metal. So usually aluminum or maybe brass. and you have some machinery. This was way before all this CNC stuff. I mean, some of the, big shops that were specialized had a lot of digital, machinery. But at this time, it was just two guys, little room.
Yeah.
We had, a traditional big, heavy Bridgeport milling machine and a lathe. And the designer comes in with an idea. He says, I want this perfume bottle. It's sort of triangular, but it sort of twists, sort of pyramid shape maybe, but it twists. And you just have to make it. You sit down, you're doing a lot of drawing, you're doing a lot of measuring, and you do as much as you can on the machines. And then where you can't make a cut with a machine, you start to just, make scribe lines and sand to the scribe line.
Sounds like making capos to me.
Well, making prototypes of capos. Or they're probably like making, very similar to lutherie, probably, carving scrolls and things like that. And so I learned this trade of how to really make things, which I had no exposure to before that. And then I started my own business after a little while, and I was in Brooklyn in Dumbo, and the artists found out about me. They would bring me a sculpture in clay and say, could you make this in clear plastic?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so then actually I got really specialized doing plastic casting. And if you've ever watched it done on a small scale, it's not it's kind of messy work. And I did that for a few years, and it was fairly successful, but eventually I decided I want to play more, and I saw just not getting the calls I used to get, and just kind of tired of this. And
then you met Barbara.
Then I met Barbara.
Barbara von Deutschland.
Yeah, I met a German girl, and we sort of dated across continents for a couple of years, maybe, a year and a half maybe. And then after 9/11, I kind of made a decision.
Yeah.
I'm going to go over there and see what I can do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cross-continental dating is hard. And
Right.
9/11 probably didn't make travel a lot easier.
Right. Well, it was just doing what I was doing in New York. Just all of a sudden, I just saw the floor falling through on that.
Mm-hmm.
And, just even going to meetings in Manhattan from Brooklyn every morning, in the weeks after that, I was like, man, this is just... And it already, at that point, I already was starting to think, I want to just make a big change.
Yeah.
So by that time, I was trying to sell capos. And there was I think Oren had already gotten a set by then. Yeah. But I was...
It was suggested to her that Arnold Schnitzer put on at least the E capo, so...
Did she just have
Well, that's my input.
Oh,
yeah.
I was like, I have these cool things that my friend Rob, who you met before, uses, so she tried them.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of word of mouth from that.
At that time, I decided, it was sort of like a side idea. At that point, I always wanted to keep doing it, but I decided, well, I could make them, because it's a pretty complicated shape. At the time, I didn't have any digital machinery either. I mean, I had I had a CNC milling machine, but the software was very primitive. So making a surface like that wasn't really, wasn't very practical. It might have been possible.
Right.
But so I decided I'll do it in lost wax casting, which is the way a lot of jewelry is made. Mm-hmm. And I did that in bronze with lost wax casting. It ended up cleaning them up, just was prohibitive time-wise. And so I just kind of left it aside, went to Europe for a while.
Left it to me.
And left it in Chris. I left him.
Clean up and
I had a bag of like 30 parts. I took him to one jeweler that I knew and asked her to work on them, but a month later, she says, I just don't have time to do this, Rob. I'm going to send him back. I'm going to send him over to Chris,
Gave me the parts and got on the plane to Germany and said, hey, this guy just ordered a couple of these. You mind just polishing these up?
Just polish them up and give them over to him.
Perfect. Putting them together and mailing them out, collecting the money for it and
sending it to me.
So I did that for about, a year, and that was, I built a website for him and started a list of installers. Bill Merchant was the first one that was actively included on his website. He was buying a bunch of them every year, 4 or 5 sets. So, and then, then it started snowballing to the point where I just said, I have a full-time job. I can't just get these out in a timely manner. So Rob was, by that time, it was, an actual business, and Rob took it over again. And
so, I just had to figure out what to do here, because I was living in a small apartment with my girlfriend and playing in the Göttinger Symphony.
Okay, sure.
And we had a little cellar space, about probably 8 by 10, and I bought some polishing machines. I found a guy in Missouri. I started out, I found a few guys, or two different guys, one that just didn't pan out, and then another that would do blanks for me in brass. And so he would carve the channels and drill the holes at the proper angles, but it wasn't shaped. And so I'd have to sand the surface into there, and then polish it all out, assemble it, and put the leather on. And so I was able to do it. But it just, one of the things, it was a guy in the States that was sending the stuff to me, and I would say, I want like 200 parts or whatever. Sure. And so, I get this stuff 3 months later. So somebody would call me and say, can you do this a little different? Could you put a little handle on the end of the e-stop? Mm-hmm. It's like, no. No, what you see is what you get. I don't have any machining capability. And that's how it went on for years. Then we moved to Cologne, had kids. I was on the balcony doing the polishing. And then about 3 years ago, I finally rented a real shop space and bought a modern CNC machine with modern software and learned how to do it with, so now the entire shape is milled with the machine down to a 1/10 of a millimeter.
And so now you're using software for this.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Is there like a specific program?
It's called CAD CAM.
Okay.
So you make a digital, you make a CAD drawing, which is vector graphics, rendition of the shape you want to make. And then your CAM side of it is, you will figure out what the machine needs to do to create that shape.
Okay.
And so that took me about a half a year to get it to the point where I could really do this job of, just learning.
How did the closers, because the angle's got to be a challenge, right? Because you can't just go straight across, right? It's like this.
Yeah, it was good that we brought it along. I mean, listeners can't see it, but that was what I spent a lot of time on at the beginning, because you would see a lot of people, just even looking at the e-closer, some of them work better than others.
Yeah.
And I decided, well, the sharper the angle, the sharper the forward angle, the better it gets over the string without pushing it aside, but the more likely it is to pop open. Mm-hmm. And the more vertical.
Let me see if I can illustrate it a little better. You reach up and you pull that arm 45 degrees onto the string. You reach and you pull at the string, and most of the time with a capo, with one of these arms, it's going to push the string to the side, as if you're pulling the string, because that's just the way a 90-degree angle would work. But these aren't 90-degree angles. He's engineered them so that as you turn it, it presses more and more down onto the string to lock it in a
turns.
position.
Yeah, if it just turns, because it comes from the side of the string.
Right.
So it's got to also come from above. Otherwise, it'll only just push the string aside. Yeah.
Sure.
And so, something that the only person to do that I know of, that it's angled forward, so it's coming down at a slope as it gets to the string, but the shaft is also threading down into the bracket.
Yeah.
So it's going down that way too.
Okay.
I don't know how much that affects the entire, the entire process, but it does a little bit. It moves probably a 0.5 millimeter down because of that. And then in this case, I tried all different angles, and I decided in the end, angling it forward. Probably don't want to say the actual number, but I don't remember it anyway, so it's not an option. I angle them out a little bit, and then I angle the fingers. They don't come across at 90 degrees from the shaft. They're angled up a little bit as well.
Okay.
And this is just what I found worked the best.
Okay.
And then it's also, as far as effectiveness on an installation, the flatter your fingerboard is, then the better it's going to work. If you have a lot of scoop in your fingerboard, then your C string's going to be real high at the E.
Right.
And then it's going to be harder to get that finger closed without deflecting the string to the side a lot.
Okay.
Probably your fingerboard, your camber, your curvature, probably a higher curvature makes for an easier installation as well.
Okay.
Because you'll see some installations where they work, but there's no getting around the fact that it does push the string to the side a fair amount.
Sure.
But
every one of these things is different.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of times where Rob has had to, there just wasn't wood to attach part of the, to put the screw where it's supposed to be. But, Rob works well with luthiers, with base repairmen, installers to kind of customize it so that they're satisfied. It's not like you just get them in the mail and you're stuck with them. It's an evolving process trying to perfect this thing. And this is a bass player that has some machining and engineering background that provided us a solution that's, pretty handy.
Right. So if you've got, so you go, you want an extension.
Yeah.
And you go to a shop, and then they're crafting they're drilling the hole, and they're installing the wood, and then then they install these onto the instrument.
Yeah, well, you'll want to have the E-stop first usually.
Okay.
The capos doesn't matter if he has them when he starts the job or not. Well, it might matter. But yeah, usually the shop will just call me and say, "Can I get a set? I got an extension." And I send them the set. And what the typical thing is you mount the E-stop under the nut.
Right.
And then you've got to reshape the nut. You're going to cut it anyway to accommodate the extension. And then you've got to put a secondary notch in there to fit over the E-stop plate.
Right.
You screw that down. And depending on, you might drill a hole through the scroll to get the string back. Or a lot of people, Upton especially, is the guys that are really known for doing these. A lot of people are doing it, but Upton probably has the most volume for running the string back through the extension so that it doesn't need to go through the scroll.
So that that's interesting. Okay, like my extension guides, it's like drilled through the scroll.
Right.
So but this runs the standard. Or what you're seeing is
that was the standard probably, and in maybe the last 5 years or so, a lot more people are putting the pulley doesn't just take it around 90 degrees and into the hole in the scroll. But it goes back into the scroll. Back into the extension. And then you've got a secondary pulley that allows it to pop out of the extension just above the A peg, or it could be the E peg too, depending on how you build it. With the A peg, the A tuner, you got a real advantage that you got all this tension now. It's holding the thing onto the scroll.
Okay.
So you don't really need a screw anymore up at the top.
Right.
Yeah.
But the actual screw extension itself would be kind of held in place by the tension of the string. Okay.
Yeah. Well, now here, this is what I recommend. Some people do it, some people don't. There's probably 100 variations, as many variations as there are installers. But I mount the extension to the E-stop plate first, and then once then I carefully chalk fit the part that lays over the scroll over the volutes.
Yeah.
I chalk fit it so it really matches well. And then in the end, you've got one screw through the E-slot plate that's holding the extension in place at the nut end. And you don't need anything else after that because the tension from the string is pulling it against the scroll. So that's, just that one screw is enough.
The website is, in case you want to see pictures of this.
I'll link up to that. Yeah.
The website is basscapos.com, basscapos.com, and the listeners could look at an illustration and get an idea of what we've been discussing.
Yeah,
right.
Hard for them.
I'm sure a lot of it, if it's not looking at it, it's hard to follow.
Do people ever just put on? Because I have 4 closers on my. Actually, I have a B extension, so I just have it. But I do. Some of my former colleagues in Chicago would. Some just put like a D on. Do people ever do that?
I have a big French bass with. I just don't have the real estate, and I really don't want to mess around too much with the structure of the extension, but mostly. I have these gigantic brass tuners.
Right.
And it's so top heavy.
Well, he's got hat pegs. He's got big hat pegs.
Yeah.
Wait, you're talking about your French bass or the other bass? Oh, the French bass. No.
So I have the D, and I have the original E that Biana put on, but I have a D. But it's not enough all the time. Like if you're playing a piece of Bach and you want that octave C, well, you got the open C.
Yeah.
You got the D and you got the E. So maybe you'd have to travel back and forth for an E flat. Or a C sharp D flat. But, it gives me like way more options than
Right.
Just whipping my hand back all the time.
D is such a commonly closed note.
Sure.
Of all the extension notes, I mean, C is already there. The D is probably, between C sharp, D, and E flat. D is probably 75% of those notes that you would encounter. So,
but what? You close the D, your hand goes back, like you go back to the nut normally, and then you can move up your half step. So I just have an extra major second there on my bass with it closed.
Well, that's cool. What do it must be fun. Like it's cool to hear about your journey, like getting into designing and working with your hands and like that. And what's like, is it? And you're an artist, right? You're like a bass player, and you do this and stuff. Do you feel like you kind of scratch that creative itch, like working on this, working on these capos? It must be really creative, like trying to figure out how to put these things together and working with the CAD software.
Right, sure. Yeah, I mean, I've always had this side thing. I've always wanted to have some tools. I always wanted to make things. And as far as being an artist, I suppose I've worked with a lot of artists. And so, being, having come up with something that really succeeds, and no one else has really done, something exactly parallel to this. It's pretty happy.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and it's interesting to learn those engineering type of skills, and put that together. Yeah, it ties in really well with just kind of like the craft of playing an instrument or something along.
I left out when I left high school. I wanted to be a musician, but I had then elected to be an engineer, and I went to Ohio State for a year and a half.
Oh, you did?
So I did mechanical engineering. I did some of the mechanics classes and stuff like that. So so I at least have the background where I can tell you, if the string is going over the pulley with 45 degrees, 45 degrees break angle, I can calculate the down force on the pulley shaft and, have that basic knowledge.
How many pounds of pressure do the four strings exert on the bass?
The bridge? Oh, on the tailpiece, around 240.
240 pounds of pressure on the tailpiece?
The linear tension of the strings, I think a set of flexicores is like 60 to 62 pounds per string.
Per string, okay.
Yeah, so you're talking about the tension on the tailpiece is like 240 pounds. And then your down force is a function of your break angle over the bridge, the height of the bridge, basically. And I don't have that number offhand.
I'd be curious, though, to understand where this extra amount of pressure using an extension will modify or perhaps endanger, an older bass. I mean, because people don't.
Is that a concern? Because
well, I know a lot of luthiers just don't like the extensions. I know that I was, got to a certain point in my career in New York City trying to freelance, and one of the top people said point blank, "Oh, well, if you don't have an extension in New York, you're just not going to work." So, and I've heard a lot of my friends, the bass repairmen, that just say, I hate doing it, but if you come and ask me to, I'll do it. But that's what I was saying. There's concerns about adding more pressure to maybe a fragile scroll if it's
I mean,
if you take an original instrument that wasn't 440 that's already been beefed up, and then you add this.
Well, I think there's a misconception that it's going to put more tension on the top. And I even there's a guy in Germany that was talking to me for a long time. He says, well, this guy wants me to do it, but I'm just afraid. It's an old instrument, and I don't want to add any tension to the top. And it's like, well, why would you be adding in tension to the top? And he said, well, because the string is heavier. I said, well, why is the string heavier? He says, well, it just is. It's a lower tone. It's going to be heavier. And I said, well, the string is the same tension, it's the same diameter. It's just longer is the reason it's lower. And it turned out that that's not completely true. Because tomastic strings, I don't know if it's true of all tomastic strings, but the spirocores at least, if you buy an extension C, then in a mittel, then that's actually going to be the same diameter as a stark regular length E.
Okay.
So that he was partly true. I think in all other sets, Daddario and Perastro, they are the same. It's just the same string. It's just longer. So you're not going to be tension on the string. The linear tension is going to be the same. The force on the downforce on the bridge is going to be the same.
Is it the way the tension is distributed? Because something must change if you're running the string. Is it just distributed differently through the bass, or is there just like no effect?
There might be, like I said, if there was some tiny crack in the scroll by the volume that you didn't know about, it wasn't an issue before.
To compromise it, sure, but I'm pretty sure that don't most people notice a difference when they add an extension to their bass? I think it changed the feel of it slightly.
It seems to.
You know your bass pretty well.
For me, it changed whenever I left something open,
Yeah,
that D and play a D scale, or that C, or like
sympathetic strings.
Yeah,
so that's
or a B flat and play some Eroica or something like that.
Yeah,
for sure. But is there any other difference that you've noticed? Like I haven't gone around thinking about that.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it seems like there's more people report that it seems to open up the bass. And people that say it's, hurt their sound. It's very rare. I mean, it happens, but it's very rare. I think it's just that, once you're playing regularly, playing those D's and C's, your top is just vibrating other frequencies that it wasn't vibrating before.
You think it's kind of opening up the wood or something?
Yeah, I think so. Just get your top used to playing that contra C a lot, and it's just, there's going to be movement in there that doesn't happen otherwise.
Yeah. I have to, lately I've actually noticed, practicing in a more, confined area in London where I am now, that I will actually, hear things differently. The intonation of the instrument will change. I will actually set the key, if I'm playing an E flat, if I set the E flat versus the E natural, the sympathetic vibrations of the other strings are different. What you're playing actually sounds tonally slightly altered because you've got some more different responsiveness, maybe different colors.
Yeah, that's different sympathetic vibrations on the lower strings.
I mean, so it's not just simply hitting the low notes that Brahms actually provided for us without writing them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We were discussing this before. When you play a certain Brahms symphony, you see the arpeggio going down, the cellos go down to the root, and we play it an octave above because it's not written. Well, a lot of us now that are playing these extensions or have 5 strings, we actually go down to that bottom note.
And that reminds me, we were just talking before we hit record on this about standardization of tuning.
Oh, right.
And when that happened, can you kind of summarize what we were talking about?
I'll try to summarize it. Yeah.
Talk.
Because I just found some stuff last year. There's a music newspaper. I think it was out of Leipzig. I think it was called Der Musiker. And there was a page from it, or a few pages from it, from around 1890. And it described an invention for the double bass that had been come up with by I think a Berlin bass player working with a Geigenbauer, that's a luthier, a bass luthier, or a violin maker, is Geigenbauer. Violin builder, right. I'll probably slip a lot of German words in during this interview because when I'm speaking English at home.
Where we're sitting right now.
It's fully
right. We'll speak English at home, but when we're speaking English, if any of my friends that are, whatever, will just happen to be speaking English, half of the nouns will be German nouns. Yeah, right. And, there's various people, I have friends that some have been here for 10 years, some for 20.
Well, you get this sort of funny kind of tangent off of our tangent, but you get this sort of funny when you're in Europe, this kind of pan-European English that's kind of like the phrases are a little bit, it's like it's English, but you're kind of slipping in different words, and like the syntax is a little bit different.
I didn't start, incidentally, this is a side story. I didn't start playing bass till my 4th year of college, so I kept on recalling the rosin resin. So once I moved to Germany and adopted the word California, I've just been using that. So, no accident there.
Resin. Well, when you're in middle school, it's okay to call it resin, but once you get to high school, then that means something else.
Yeah.
So you have to remember to stay. You have to switch over to rosin. Well, anyway, so let me get back to the story. So it described this invention with the first C extension, as far as I know, I think as far as anyone knows, was a machine extension, a keyed extension.
Okay.
It was come up with in Leipzig. And at that, concurrently, there's another article, I think from this, might be the same issue, that talked about the standardization, or no, not the standardization of the fourth tuning, but the implementation of the 5-string in Germany. And it was still, no, I think it was the first 5s. It described someone who's introduced a 5-string bass for the orchestra.
When was this around?
This might have been 1885.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was, a discussion of whether we want to have 5-string basses in the orchestra or whether, of course, there's a lot of, like any new idea, especially in Deutschland, there's a lot of resistance to it. Mm-hmm. And so, there was just a little battle between will we have extensions or will we have 5-strings? And they just made the decision, we're going to have 5-strings. But in America, the symphony orchestras quickly adopted, quickly, 30, 40 years is not really quickly, but you look at pictures of the Philadelphia Orchestra from the 40s, and every single bass has a machine. Mm-hmm. And then I think...
Who is it? Because Stenholm is the name you still hear, right?
Yeah.
But do you remember when Stenholm started doing? I'm sure that wasn't the first of them.
I'm sure. Yeah, that I don't know, and I don't know anyone who does.
Yeah,
because I've asked. Oren has put me in touch with a few different people who have knowledge. Spacing on the name of the guy who did he's in the Philharmonic, and he made a lot of fingered extensions. Bill Blossom, yeah. Wrote me a little letter and, told me just what he could remember about when people were using machines, people switched over to fingered.
He was one of the first people to make these extensions in the States, the wooden extensions.
Yeah.
That's what built the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, so he said in the 60s, people started to take off the machines, and by the 70s, there were maybe more fingered extensions than machines in orchestras. And then it wasn't until, I should have asked that guy from Robertson's if he knows when they first started making their key, their levered.
That's a great question. I feel like it was, if I was just going to guess, I apologize, but I would say maybe way early 90s, you think?
Yeah, and I'm thinking even earlier, because this was 91 when I saw Homer's bass that Gage had just done the first fingered gates, first fingered extension with gates that I knew of in New York. And so that's not that long ago that Gates even came onto the scene at all. Mm-hmm. And then I would say in the last 10 years, they're really taking over.
Yeah. Especially in the U.S., it's kind of the standard, pretty much.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, because you have this knowledge of, you're just talking about tension on the different instruments. So what's the tension on a standard set, if you know off the top of your head, of a 5-string bass? What additional tension is that?
What's going to be 25% more?
25% more of what?
Yeah. So then when I was in Göttingen, I played my audition on my Fretschner bass with, the extension. It's kind of cool because the Dittersdorf in the cadenza, I think in the cadenza in the second movement, I left it open on D. And when you're playing in D, leave it open on D. If you're playing a solo.
Sure.
And, it's a I don't know if that, what effect that had, but they ended up hiring me.
You were impressed.
But they said that you leave that home at home. You have to leave your bass at home because it won't fit in our trunk.
Oh.
And that wasn't a real reason. It only, less, maybe 3/4 of an inch past my scroll.
You mean because of the extension?
That was what they told me, that why they didn't want me to play my Fretschner. Yeah, because then it wouldn't fit in the trunk, so we wouldn't be able to.
Or it's just not the traditional way to shovel bass.
And they had a Fretschner that was about made in, probably, I think it was made in 90. And I actually know the guy who was probably the primary guy who worked on it. Yeah. And, they're very nice basses. They're really nice orchestra basses for just, playing spiccato, playing pianissimo. Mm-hmm. But once you need to get loud, you really have to press. And the pizzicato on those things, it just nothing happens. You can pull as hard as you want. Just don't enjoy it. The tops are thick.
But there's also, I was talking to one of the bass builders that the conference, the Bass Europe 2016, and he was, I had forgotten why there was two different shapes of fingerboards.
Yeah.
And one that has the big angle. I'm not sure what it's called.
Rumber bevel.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Yeah, that was to allow the gut string to vibrate.
Okay.
And we have less vibration now. So there's been a lot of changes that are going to assist us from moving from 5 bass, if you don't like 5 bass, to using an extension.
Right. Well, anyway, there's an argument I just want to put in that, some people say, no, a 5-string is fine. You can play one for anything. You can play jazz on it, play solos on it. And there, some of the ones we saw this week at the conference, there were some very, very nice
played really easily.
They played really easily. But did you see anybody play a solo on one?
No.
Except for Donovan, but that's a special case. So that's your, that says something right there.
Sure. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So, a lot more tension on the top. You have to, have to build things slightly different.
Yeah. If you converted a 4-string over to a 5-string, which I know you hear people doing, is there anything you have to do to compensate for that extra tension, or are you just sort of like taking a chance that the structure will hold?
Well, you can just build up the lower saddle. That's again vocabulary. Sure. Is that what you call it?
What is that? No, that is the saddle.
The saddle, the saddle. Because in Germany, there's 2 saddles. There's a obere saddle and an untere saddle. And then we call the saddle, right? So the saddle, you can raise the saddle to take away, raise it so that you remove 20% of the top tension. You can, put in a bigger bar, put a belly patch.
Well, there's probably the difference of the placement of the bar, too. The bar is situated according to the width of the top.
That's a good point.
You're spreading more string with a specified distance so that you can get in between, over I think it's a wider bridge. It has to be.
Yeah.
So the foot of one of the feet of the bridge is not going to necessarily be where it was originally position to go over the bass bar. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, so it's been done a lot, I think. I think that bass that Donovan was playing, did you talk to him about the bass?
We were talking a little bit about the bass. Donovan Stokes, we're talking about. He has a super cool 5-string that has an extension, and then he has a high C string on it. And then
but it's a D, right?
Right.
As far as I'm aware,
I think it's strung up to a high D.
Yeah, it's a hybrid solo and orchestra tuning, right?
It's also a very, very resonant.
It's
beautiful sounding.
He has the tailpiece off of the bass too, so he's got the wires.
What is the name of that? You said the name of that. It's got no wood. It is
just wires.
Just wires that wrap around the.
That's the thing that you see in the States as one of the potential.
Kevin Marvin. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that seems, it works. Sometimes it really works well. Yeah. Other times it doesn't work so well.
Right. But depends on the instrument of the player.
It's not, it's something worth trying. But, where were we going with that? It's just a fantastic bass.
He was asking about converting 5-string.
The
bass.
Yeah. Well, another thing I'm curious about, and this would be great for both of you guys, because a lot of people that listen to this are curious about what they could do in music besides just like trying to get an orchestra job or working the freelance scene or teaching or whatever. Like both of you guys are doing that. Mm-hmm. So it might be kind of cool to hear. I think people find that really interesting, just like different paths that people can go down. So what's satisfying about running your own business like you're doing? Like maybe what's an unexpected challenge or something? Are there any thoughts off the top of your head?
It's way less social than playing in an orchestra.
Yeah, that's true.
That's not always a bad thing.
Right.
I'm working completely alone. I very rarely even have telephone calls during the day. It's all communication is by email. There would probably be more phone work if I was in the States.
Yeah.
But because the biggest customer base is in the States. If it's not in the States, it's in the UK. Mm-hmm. And then
I've seen a lot of these extensions and various capos. I moved to London to live for a couple of years in early June and managed to catch 5 of the Proms concerts. So 4 different instruments or orchestras: Berlin and London Symphony, London Philharmonia, Dresden, I think.
Yeah.
And, it's not unheard of to see these capos of various manufacturer. And, you hear that section going down to the bottom.
Now, are you seeing a combination of 5 strings and 4 strings extensions?
I am, yeah. I mean, depending on geographically where these orchestras originate, you're going to see a predominance. A lot of times we know that some of these sections are using instruments created by the same maker. So they're going for that consistency.
Oh, yeah, really?
So
You saw bass sections that were consistent?
Yeah.
Wow. Because, I don't know how ubiquitous it is in Germany.
I don't think that you see that on the road. What we're talking about is, shipping the basses from, Berlin or Dresden to London. I can tell you that I used to see the same orchestras all the time in Carnegie Hall and realized, after a season or two, first of all, there's a lot of subs. There's a lot of people that just don't go on the road, but you don't see the good basses.
Right, a lot of orchestras do tour basses.
Right.
Yeah.
And, even the New York Philharmonic, they have their own basses that they bring on tour, but even those are really good. Some of these other, the former communist countries that haven't had the budget, they were bringing what we would consider pretty substandard instruments. But the ones that I was seeing in London, from Dresden or Philharmonic, the same players seem to be superior and probably less distance to travel. But you see people playing down to the low C.
Right.
My point, and so it's.
It's still almost unknown in German orchestras to have a 4-string with a extension, and most orchestras just have a set of 5 strings.
Right.
Mostly. But there's a few here and there now that they want. Some of the bass player will just have a 4-string, and he says, "I really want to play this in the orchestra. I really don't like my 5-string that you have for me." And so it's I think there's Aachen. Some of the smaller ones you wouldn't have heard of have done it. I think Stuttgart Opera, Dresden. What's it called? Can't remember the name of the orchestra in Dresden, but it's here and there. I don't know if it'll ever really catch on.
But outside of Germany, it's pretty common to see the extension.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, outside of Central Europe.
You can get a good survey by looking at the website and the installers page.
Yeah, that's true. See where they are.
You can see Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, United States, of course, and London and
England, a little Scandinavia. Yeah. Haven't worked my way into Holland really at all because there's so many builders there that want to hand make the latches and really finely carve them.
Okay.
And they've got money over there. They can spend a day on each one. And in Germany, you've got so many makers that there's no problem. We want some 5 strings. We need a few more 5 strings for the orchestra. Just go on the list, see who we want to go. Let's go to Poland, and they probably have some already made for us. In other countries, just ordering a new bass for your orchestra is not so easy.
Right.
And they don't have the arts funding that we have here.
Yeah. One thing that I found interesting following Rob around this conference is, there's a bunch of the Geigenbauer, the builders that, wanted to have a comprehensive solution that they could just install onto the bass. And, this is the problem with, Rob providing one piece of functionality that you attach to the extension versus, sending over an extension. There's difficulties because it's,
the difficulty of sending over an extension is every bass, it's like a snowflake, right?
Yeah,
so
right. Exactly.
That becomes kind of a challenge without having to create something where you really cut the scroll away. Right.
We're talking about that, but it's also the familiarity. It's like anybody who's built an extension in the States doesn't expect me to send them a blank that they can just trim and fit. They know they're gonna have to do some work.
There's the scroll work, and they're attaching it, and then there's also the string length, the Menzor.
Yeah,
that's one of the luthier's jobs is to position the E-stop and the
you got to figure out where you put the wheel.
Exactly.
And now that people have done it. Once one person does it, then you have to do it too, is not drill the scroll through the scroll anymore, which I don't have any problem with drilling the scroll. But now that, the customer will see, well, I see this one where he routed the string back through the extension body, and then it comes down right over the A tuner, and that looks really nice. But I can see why that, for, a luthier who's, not a mechanical engineer, why that would be intimidating to look at that and say, I'm not sure how I'm going to do that.
but the cables work even if you did drill through the scroll.
Yeah, it works fine.
It would work however.
Yeah. So, what was I saying? So a lot of the German luthiers were saying, well, we'd sort of like to do this, but couldn't you do more for us than just sending us the capos?
Sure.
And maybe if there's a way, I've thought of it, if I can get good enough measurements, maybe I could make a blank where I've put in the pulleys, basically put in the pulleys and done some basic just cutting, and they only have to chuck the...
You need like a real consistent measurement, right? To do
way of measuring.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. The better, already I've done some custom work for different people in different countries, and I just say, just get yourself a ruler and take lots and lots of pictures, and I want you to put the ruler here, and I want you to put the ruler here, and I want a photo from this angle, and they do it. And some of these collaborations have turned out quite successfully.
Okay.
I have to think about it more, because I saw that these guys, if I could do more, if I could get more of the mystery out of it. They haven't done it before.
I know when I got my extension that, the luthier spent a long time convincing me how perfect the location was, the mathematics involved in it.
Right.
I don't know that it's really that abstract. I mean, obviously you don't just use trial and error. I mean, there's some, thought into this, but is it mysterious? Is it?
Yeah, well, you haven't done it before, and, even when I was doing this, there would be periods, I made one extension in my life. I made it like 15 years ago, and it sat on a shelf, and just a couple years ago I finished it up. Basically, I still haven't fitted it on the base, but I still have the base for which I made it, but it's a demo model now.
But the critical measurement, because like from where the E closer would be to where the C.
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
the end of the fingerboard
ain't going to be right.
Right. You've got it. That's the most important thing for sure. Yeah.
And then we know that strings just don't. I mean, you can divide a string in half.
Yeah.
And you get an octave, but positioning a subset of that octave isn't always. They're not exactly. It's not. What's the temperament on a piano exact? They're not exact.
Yeah, well, your high school physics book will say it would be 25% longer. And in reality, for various reasons, it ends up being a little bit more. I think on mine, I measured it, and the closest measurement I could come up with, it was 26.3. And I think other people have thrown out that number. And I'm sure it's going to vary by, a few millimeters, plus or minus, probably depending on how much fingerboard scoop you have.
And now if something changed in terms of set, or who knows when you need to adjust these, you can, right? You can take them out, and you can.
Yeah, well, that's one of the big features of mine. Is
so
there are these slots. They're sort of U-shaped channels.
Yeah.
And you put screws in the side of the extension that hold the bracket, hold the capo bracket in place, and you set the screws far enough apart that you have a little bit. I have about 3/16 in each direction of adjustment range. So, if you switch to a thinner string, then it's going to close in a slightly more forward.
Off,
so the pitch will get off, yeah.
And so how does that work? So you got screws. I'm just looking here. So you got screws, and then you can. Okay, I see. And then you can loosen it. You can move it. You can get it has play in the mechanism, and then you can tighten the screws.
Tighten the screws back down, of course.
That's cool. Okay,
got it. And then even the angle, like we were talking about earlier, that if you have more forward angle, then it's going to pop down on the string without deflecting it better, but it won't stay closed as well. And so this, on the E-stop, unfortunately, that is not adjustable. But on the other ones, it is. So as you move farther back, you can make it more... You can reduce that rake angle.
Yeah.
And So that's what tends to happen. I find is the angle of the capos won't be exactly the same for each one.
Sure.
One thing that I've discovered, another recent development is that with modern tuners, with even the iPhone app that I have for tuning, the frequencies now are detected so much better that you can actually tune your C and some of these chromatic notes way better than even like 15 years ago.
Right.
Where you didn't have a tuner that could detect the frequencies. It would give you a false reading. So it's a lot easier to trust where this,
And this is something you could do at home too. You don't have to take it into the shop. If you decide, your tuner says that the C sharp is just a little flat. I think most people, if they are competent with a screwdriver, could.
If there's a time where I don't feel real comfortable, like I'm doubting that pitch, I just flip the capo and use my finger.
Yeah, that's true too.
You vibrate into position like you do everywhere else. It's not like you would be stuck there playing an out of tune note.
Right. Well, I think that's that's the biggest. What would you say, Jason? You have fingered. You have a gated extension. Is what's more, the big advantage over the machine is that you can play with your finger. You can adjust to pitch.
Right.
Or is it vibrato?
It's a lot of things. I think and some people the machine extensions, they swear by them, and that's great. Right. But for me, I never really learned on that. So it's like playing a bassoon all of a sudden for 4 notes.
Exactly.
And then anything mechanical on the bass is prone to failure.
Yeah.
And at least my experience is finding someone who's willing to work on those can be kind of hard. Yeah. Because there's just a lot of moving parts, and buzzing can be a problem.
There's noises. And just the simple noise of affecting that change of pitch.
And again, people love it, so everybody finds their own way that they like. But for me, I played on one for several years, and then it would start to buzz, and that buzz is right next to my left ear. And even if it's maybe not the most detectable thing, 20 feet away from the bass, it would drive me bonkers.
Right.
So there's that, and then also just being able to just have sometimes you're playing some Bach and you just need a low D. You don't need to be jumping around with your fingers, and so I don't know. They're definitely pluses and minuses for everything, but as I look around, this is pretty much the standard in America is gated closers. So
are there gates? Yeah, I've only had one once for a few weeks. I just had the bass in to do some work on it, and then I resold it. I think I found the bass, and you managed to sell it for me. And I was working with this extension. Are there modern key extensions that can lock down on the various extension notes?
Oh, that lockdown?
No, I'm pretty sure when I was at Manhattan School that you could. There was, I forget actually, but it wasn't just simply the E that would lock.
Because that's one thing. It would be nice to be able to lock a D. It's really nice to be able to lock a D, whether you're playing Bach or you're doing some kind of solo jazz stuff. That would be.
I guess mine don't lock, but it works. I've never thought about it. It just holds, but. So if a luthier, let's say the luthier that isn't doing extensions right now, so what do they need to do to start doing extensions? Let's say they want to use, so they can just contact you if they want to get if they want to use the bass capos, and you can set them up, right?
Yeah, well, if they haven't made one before, it's a good way to go is to just contact me, because I've got all kinds of photo bucket slideshows. And they're to answer questions, and they don't have to make the gates or even the E-stop. They can get it from me.
Okay. Is it okay, great. And is it like I'm very ignorant in the world of woodworking and machine, I can't even sand a piece of wood, but is it a complex process to actually make an extension, on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of bass world stuff?
Well, I'm not really a trained luthier at all. I do certain repairs, but I would say it's fairly up there.
Okay, so it's up there. Okay.
Yeah.
But okay, cool.
And it depends on how beautiful you want to make it. You see people just take a thin strip of wood, make a real rail, and instead of chalk fitting it to the volute, some people would just take Bondo. And of course they'll put saran wrap over the volute so they don't get, and then they just put the rail down, get it at the proper angle so it's the way it's supposed to be over the fingerboard, or in relation to the fingerboard, and just put it in the Bondo. And when it sets, they can sand away the Bondo that's splooged out of the sides, and they've got themselves an extension. Okay. And they have to go and fit in the wheel.
It might not be the most attractive extension.
Not the most extensive, but I would say that if you're in principle, it shouldn't be that hard to build one.
I've seen a lot of varieties traveling around New York. I mean, I prefer having a place for my left hand to travel, especially on my bass that I bought from Rob. It's got those old-fashioned
hat pegs.
Hat pegs, and you have to get your arm around it, and I don't want to lose contact of that fingerboard because I can't see it. Right. I need to feel where I am. So some people put a great deal more wood into these things. Some of them make them very simple.
There's a thumb rail, I think, is the most common term, and I hate them. I can't play with my thumb up by my fingers. So my thumb is just way open on the side of the peg box. And is that how you play? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I try to finger as little as possible down.
Oh, right, yeah.
But I'm tempted. I sort of like grabbing the scroll with my whole hand and just doing what needs to be done. But fortunately, I can. Yeah, it's we're still in the bass evolving at white hot speed, but we're still. Nobody really has.
This is a branch. This is one of those little branches, like French and German bow or 4-string, 5-string.
I like talking to my students. I say, what position is this? Is this 0? Is this negative half?
This is negative
1, negative 3. And it's just to illustrate the point, or the standing technique versus the sitting technique, and depending on if you have the hat pegs or if you have nice pointy. Tuning pegs that can slice up your hand. And, everything's different in terms of that. Right. So it's definitely we're still in the early days of.
Yeah, well, let's still go both ways because there are lots of guys who want a little rail there to put their thumb on.
Me
under. Yeah, you.
Well,
you're not alone.
I feel on my French bass I have. A specific spot. It's like I said, I go back to the nut, or you go into the crook to find your D or E flat. Yeah. Well, I have a place where I can go back to and have a point of reference without me seeing it.
Yeah, that's true.
And I've played in the last year alone. I played, I think, a Shostakovich symphony and a Nielsen symphony, where it wasn't just simply locking a note in place. We were continuing, some articulated dotted eighth and 16th rhythms all the way down. So there's times where you're requested by that composer to play as if you had your fingerboard back there.
So we shouldn't neglect to mention that it is the 5-string is just easier to play.
Oh yeah,
there's
not
just,
an argument
that on the Pullman it was. I felt like it was just it didn't matter. It didn't matter if it went below E at all.
Yeah, there's some licks like this Storm from Beethoven 6 is easier. For sure. But it's a series of pluses and minuses and both sides.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to play something like that with this fingered extension, the fingered extension. I hope you're bringing a stool that day. Because, you're doing a lot of rocking and rolling.
Right. And, but what's the percentage of licks down those low registers that are like that? Right?
Well, when you hit that lick and you can't play it,
you feel a little.
Doesn't matter how often it comes. That's the one you're going to remember.
That's true. That's true. That's funny.
But you're right. I mean, the percentage of sub-E notes in a typical orchestra program. It's got to be incredibly small.
Well, it was hilarious. I was playing Rosenkavalier with Lyric Opera in Chicago, and there were so few low Bs written. Yeah. But there are a few, and I have my low B extension. I'm just so excited. And there's a low B in Rosenkavalier, but it's in a bunch of passage work. It's just goes down, and then they cut it. I was so excited to, and so it's I didn't get a chance to play my low B. I was so looking for it. It was 1/8 note in a whole run.
I think I'm just curious, we're talking pretty much classical, and we're surrounded by a majority of classical players, but how many jazz cats put these on there and really utilize playing, melodic line or harmony?
Well, I don't know how melodic they get done, but I mean, like Rufus Reed has a extension. I'm pretty sure. Again, sorry if I'm wrong, but I'm just like picturing. I was just doing a bass camp with him a couple months ago. I see a fair amount of jazz. I wonder. I'll bet it's. And you get. I would, off the top of my head, say probably a lot of people think of it as less of a requirement.
Yeah.
You know, but it sure is a nice tool to have. And man, if you're playing like an E flat blues or B flat blues, you set that E flat. You know, like going. That's a great thing. Mm-hmm. But if I were to guess, what do you think?
It would be cool to have an F capo if you're a jazz player and playing standard, real standard repertoire.
Well, I talked to Dean. I don't know if you guys know Dean Farrell. If you don't know Dean Farrell, he's a character.
I don't know.
Well, Dean will tune his bass up a half step so it's A flat, E flat, B flat, F. What a great tuning for jazz, right? And then people would watch him play in clubs, and like some big bass players would like, what's going on? I'm hearing all these harmonics, and I'm hearing all this, it's like over like a B flat blues, but all of a sudden it's like, it's like in the key of A essentially, and he would retune for everything, but that's his thing. That makes my head explode.
Boy, I wish I could do that. I can just barely play the 4 notes.
I can barely tune my bass. I can do that.
Rob brought up an interesting point that kind of leads to, why he calls them capos versus the 5 other names for these things. When you said that you wish you had a net, which would be cool because that's a half step on the other direction that we're talking about. But you call them capos. I mean, if you don't know, guitar players playing, and they actually attach something to the instrument so they could keep the same shape of chord, their hand shape to play a chord in a different key. And that's basically, I assume that's
something that clamps over the string to raise the pitch. So I mean, that's just the first time, another Homer student mentioned it and just said, and he's got a D capo or something like that. This was when I first got to New York, and a name just stuck in my head. I haven't really thought about it consciously.
You hear people use the word closers a lot. The bass closers sounds kind of confusing. It's kind of like you're closing the deal.
It's at the end of the baseball game.
That's exactly.
Baseball.
The same with latches or gates.
Latches, right?
Gates. I mean, they all work, but I feel like capo is the least ambiguous.
Well, it's interesting to see in the web, the email traffic from the website that I monitor. And, it's really hard for people sometimes to use the word capos. We hear it, latches, closes,
What
gates.
about, can you look at the search results and see people who have clicked on the site, what their actual original search terms were?
Yeah, I can do this.
That would be an interesting thing to look at.
Those are always fun. You lose a lot of hours figuring that out.
Right.
I love seeing what people search for when they come to my site.
Right.
Car caught fire and exploded. Used to be one of the top search results in Google for quite a while. I'm still on the front page, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to go look. Now he's intrigued.
Look it up.
That was Cat Stroller. I think I'm still one of the top 2 or 3 videos on YouTube for Cat Stroller. None of these are helpful in my quest, right? There's kind of bass things, lots of bass things too. But those are 2 of my
number of
more
those
favorite.
People doing the search that were bass players is vanishingly small.
Oh, it's very small. That's not the point. It's so entertaining for me. That's my
Right. I've never thought to do that.
You use catgut, right?
Exactly.
It's gonna end up being the AC/DC current argument, Edison versus Tesla.
Oh, right.
You're gonna go the Tesla route, and the whole world's gonna go the other way. It's gonna be wow.
Well, my memory card is about to run out.
All right.
I realized I forgot to transfer the other 2 off here. We still got a couple minutes, but maybe I'll ask, where should people go if they want to know more about this?
Yeah, just go to the website basscapos.com.
And they can contact you there if they
just
have some questions.
Search for double bass capos. Double bass capos, that'll pop up number 1. Search just C extension capos. I think I might be number 1 on that.
Yeah, and I'll link up.
Link up. It's not, and my name is rather uncommon, Anzellotti.
You got two L's and
2 L's, 2 T's. Right? Yeah, it's not hard to find.
Yeah. Cool.
And I'm in Germany, so if you're in America, you have to expect to wait a week to get your stuff.
Okay.
But it's pretty cheap and easy to get stuff over there.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. Chris, thanks for doing this.
Chris at cmathers.com. If you need some web development work, I've met a bunch of bass players, whose websites work perfectly on a desktop, but don't work on the phone that we were holding up during the conversation.
That's a big deal these days. I mean, like if you're not mobile friendly.
Well, I'm bass friendly, and I've got 18 years of experience doing it. Yeah. So I'm welcome. Yep. I welcome some work if you want me to make your site a little bit more accessible. If you got to put yourself out there in this world, and I'd love to help you out.
It's amazing the number of bass shops that just, I just go on word of mouth.
And I link to these sites, so I know what they look like, and I'm always thinking.
You know how hard it was for me to find your address on my phone? Looking at your site on my phone, you know how hard it was? It was very hard.
You want to see it. You want to be able to click on an email address or get the phone number. I mean, you're in conversation like this, and we're discussing various players, and you need to have a website where you can be quickly accessed.
Yeah. And my opinion, at least, but maybe you share this, is like, and Facebook's an amazing thing. It's great, but you don't want to build your presence on something that can, speaking as somebody who spent a lot of time on MySpace.
Oh, there you go.
Just saying, if you listen to my early podcast, I correct a lot of people in MySpace.
That's almost apocalyptic.
Yeah, right. So
that said, it's pretty tough to have a a web presence nowadays without having a space on Facebook.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. I don't really.
You don't.
Yes. I just can't go there.
Well, I'll go there for you. I'll fill the void that you've left. I'm sure with all my meaningless Facebook posts. So.
Okay, great.
I think Rob would notice that I built a Facebook page without telling him.
Yeah, you should do that. You can kind of create you ever notice that you can create like a fan page for somebody? And
there's all the real Jason Heath website or the Twitter account. You don't know whether it's the actual Jason Heath or not.
Right.
Cool, so guys. People come to the real bass capos Facebook page. The real Rob Anzellotti.
Nice. Thanks, guys.
Rob, Chris, pleasure. Hope to see you again soon. And folks, I hope you enjoyed tuning into this. It's fun to do these off-the-cuff conversations, kind of rolling around between topics, and you get a really good idea of Rob's kind of scientific approach to this whole extension and capo business. So very cool. I had a great time chatting with them. So much fun meeting new people. And that's what's so cool about doing this podcast. It's just a chance for me to go out. It's kind of like a do-it-yourself doctoral degree. It's kind of what I'm thinking of this phase of my life. I'm going out and I'm talking to all these people about all sorts of different topics and having such a great time doing it and learning so much. And then I get to put that out to the wider world. So thank you for following along. And if you're interested in supporting what's going on here on the podcast, there are a lot of different ways that you can do it. Some of them involve money, some of them don't. And they're all listed at contrabassconversations.com/support. And they range from donating. If you donate, you get lifetime access to the complete Contrabass Conversations archives. It's a special archive I maintain. You'll get a link to it, and all episodes since day one, back 10 years ago, are alphabetically organized by guest. Plus, there's an index organizing everything by topic, ensemble, and school. You also get added to my insiders list, and I share exclusive content like beta releases of new projects, advanced copies of my books, and that kind of thing. And anyone who donates $20 or more gets a signed copy of my book, Winning the Audition. I'll send that in the mail to you. I'll make it out to you or to anybody that you like. It's a great gift if you have a bass player in your life or a non-bass player in your life that you think could benefit from the audition advice in Winning the Audition. You can also advertise. I'm so thankful to have Daddario on board. They're a big company, and it's so great to have them associated with the podcast. I'm truly grateful. And I've got opportunities for other companies. This is not going to become a 20 ads per episode kind of thing, or even a 5 ads per episode kind of thing. But I do have opportunities if you're a small company, if you're a big company, if you're a university, if you'd like to talk about advertising, go to contrabaseconversations.com/support, and all the information is available there. You can send me an email. You can also buy my book, By Winning the Audition. That helps out too. And like I said, if you donate $20 or more, you'll get a copy for free. I'll sign it and I'll send it to you. There are lots of other ways you can support, non-financial ways. You can transcribe an interview. Oh man, there's so many to transcribe. I think we've got 4 transcriptions. This is podcast number 278. So that's 274 transcriptions. So if you would like to help out and money is not a way that you can do so, transcribing is super helpful. You can also do a guest interview. I've had several people do guest interviews for the podcast before. That would be amazing. Please, I love it. I totally welcome it. And send me an email, go to that support page, and we can talk about that. You can also leave a review. That's super helpful. Leave a review. We have so many things you can review too. You can review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play. You can review the app. You can review Winning the Audition on Amazon. All of that helps. And you can share these episodes. Share them on social media. Email them to a friend. Text them to a friend. Tell somebody you don't know about the podcast. Get the word out. That is super helpful as well. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.